Greetings, Dragon Ball fans, and welcome to part 6 of What If Piccolo Stayed Evil, where Goku's lack of tact left a sour taste in Piccolo's mind, and he decided that Gohan, being his minion, and the instrument of his revenge, was just as important as defeating the coming Saiyans. Previously, we saw that plan come to fruition, and Piccolo managed to break Gohan down, renaming him Nokan after a type of Japanese flute. Vegeta and Napper were also vanquished, with only a little bit of effort on Piccolo's side, but Nokan, making a nice pun out of his new name, failed to do in his father, as commanded by his master. The trip to Namek to bring back both Chiaotzu and Goku, again, fell apart when Chi-Chi and Roshi ran into Frieza's men. Barely managing to return alive with Bulma, Chi-Chi then learned that Gohan was not dead, but wanted nothing to do with her anymore, despite the multiple attempts to have Shenron bring him to them. King Piccolo then announced himself to the world just in time for Jiro's cyborgs to take an interest, so they went to say hi. Nokan survived and vanished into that world, where he met other humans, installed himself as their leader, and then met a certain young woman, who, while relatively unimpressive, was by far the strongest of the bunch. Nokan then fell further into a relationship with this version of Videl, and years later, by the time they made contact with a more official resistance, Videl was well on her way to having their first and only child. The girl was named Mirai here instead of Pan by her hopelessly, possibly pathologically optimistic mother. That resistance also turned out to be led by none other than his own mother, who had thrown herself into the role to avoid the days and nights of worrying about her lost son. It took a while and an old photograph, but Nokan slowly came to accept her. It took her and Videl's death at the cyborg's hands to finally drive home that his name really was Gohan, along with unleashing the first Super Saiyan seen in 1,000 years. At Capsule Corp, the surviving father and daughter pair helped Bulma build her time machine, on condition that they be the ones to travel back. The trip was derailed slightly by the arrival of Cell, who found 17 and 18 alive and well, and promptly ate them. Mirai fled to the past to do what she could, as Gohan fell to that monster. Traveling back further than Bulma had intended, to where Goku had died at the Saiyan battle, Mirai instead went to rescue her father from Piccolo's clutches. When those Saiyans finally did arrive, she ended up wrecking Vegeta's party after Goku came up short versus the Ozaru. She then blew everyone's mind with news of the cyborgs, that bug guy, and some vague comments about Namek and a fridge. While waiting for Bulma and family to fix up the ship, they sought further training from Kami, and he rather reluctantly showed them the time chamber. There, Mirai managed to drag first Gohan and then Goku, kicking and screaming into the Super Saiyan state that to her was mostly a reflex. Unable to obtain it for himself, Vegeta got a crash course in Kaioken from Yamcha and Tien, to whom Goku had given the basics to when they had first entered this place. The trip to Namek this time had the Saiyans, Goku, Vegeta, and Mirai, along with Krillin and Bulma, and they again ran headfirst into Frieza's forces. Well, Vegeta did, intentionally. He just knew he could do it. He could finally beat the Emperor down. It turned out not, initially, but some loose lips sunk that ship spectacularly, and Vegeta found his hook, finally breaking through to the Super Saiyan on hearing that Frieza had destroyed his planet, his kingdom, his people. Goku and Mirai watched from the sidelines, smiling at his progress, at least until the Emperor vanished, in a Ki and Frieza-infused puff of smoke. They return from Namek without incident, and are then faced with another 4 years of waiting for the cyborgs to make their appearance. But what can be done to prepare further? Their 2 years used up, the hyperbolic time chamber is no longer an option, and according to Goku there wasn't much more to gain from torturing themselves there any longer anyway. There was nothing else to do, no more training to be done, beyond what they could already do themselves. This younger version of Mirai's dad is as safe and sound as she can possibly make him. Piccolo is keeping his head firmly under whatever rock he'd found, and has no way to match even the humans at this point. Mirai can't help but feel like it's time to take her leave. So, with a backpack full of mementos, books, and a pouch of senzu, she can barely see through the tears as she climbs back into the time ship. She sits there, staring back down at who would become her father, and his whole family, still very much alive. Even that Vegeta guy had shown up to see her leave, though only from the sidelines. Looks like Bulma had come too, and is acting kind of funny around that guy for reasons that, for the moment, escape Mirai. She then looks down at the controls to see the destination. As is, she would be traveling back to a year and a bit after she had left, even though she's now 3 years older. She can't wait to get back, to see her father again, even that future Bulma woman. If she'd managed to fix everything, they would still be there, none the wiser. Maybe her mother and grandmother too. Would would they remember her leaving? would she ever have left in the first place? Could she still be there? Another her? A version of her who'd lived an entirely different life? Wait, would they even have had her? Her dad had talked about their meeting. He'd been roaming around and practically stumbled on her mother and her small group of friends in Orange City. Oh God, or Kami, or whatever. What if they never met? What if she doesn't exist in this new future? Well, the new future Gohan would then surely remember her from now, at least. And he'd be old enough to be her actual dad again, instead of this lovely but slightly weird auntie-nephew thing that they've got going on in this here and now. Her thoughts don't stop there, though. What if none of it actually worked? What if that future Bulma's ramblings, which had been echoed by this past Bulma too, turned out to be true? What if nothing they did in the past changed their particular future? They would all be over a year dead. At least her dad would, probably Bulma too, and both then and now she is quite fond of Bulma. So if it worked, her dad, as she knew him, won't exist anymore. But if it didn't work, they're all dead anyway? Could there really be nothing for her to return to? Or nothing she knows, at least? After all she'd lost, all she'd done here, all she'd fixed, she might still have nothing hers to return to. Wiping the resurgence of tears away, she starts punching buttons, then smiles grimly at the display. Either way, she'll have to time it right, but if she can keep her energy down, they won't notice her until she's ready. Then it won't matter. Either way, she'll make sure he survives. Now, smiling a bit less grimly, she waves down at them and pulls the lever, vanishing from view. The time dimension flows past, and sometime later, the blue sky erupts around her. Mirai settles the craft to the ground, hops out, and pockets the ship before floating off towards West City. A West City that is still in ruin. So the Bulmats had been right. It had changed nothing. Well, that's okay. She has a plan B. All things considered, her preferred plan, despite what that meant for everyone else on the planet. She floats there for a moment, closing her eyes, searching for their energies. She finds all three of them without much effort after all that practice with her grandfather, though that third one, that strange multitude of powers, the one that would kill her dad, is so much weaker than she expected. Mirai flies off after it and finds something entirely different. The setting itself is painfully familiar, having been burned into her memory, but there is just a meek, spindly creature slinking through the buildings and then leaping upon the two teenage-looking monsters that had ruined much of her world. Locked in confusion for a moment, she watches the Bugman consume the pair and start to transform into what she remembers. So they're linked somehow? She files that away for later as she feels out the resulting energy burst, and, well, she is less than impressed when comparing it to her own. Feeling those other powers approaching, she stays hidden, and after a bit of tooth grinding as she watches, she finally sees her younger self fly away at her father's insistence. Keeping low, she approaches, and as the green man charges up his final attack, she moves in, knocking her dad out of the way. As he tumbles, Gohan looks around confused, and then starts to shout at her again, but stops and stares at her for a moment of confusion, before hitting the ground and being knocked out. Oh crap. Sorry, Dad. What's this? The Bugman says, appraising his new toy. Just couldn't leave your daddy, could you? Well, he wasn't much of a workout anyway, so I guess you'll have to do. Mirai just stands there for a moment, staring off towards where her younger self had fled, waiting, hoping, and finally, as the energy winks out, a smile creeps across her face. She moves instantly and reaches down, putting something in her dad's mouth, then straightens and turns back to the Bugman. She asks, and he is happy to go into all the juicy details. He is Cell, the final, perfect masterpiece of Dr. Gero, the culmination of this world's greatest fighters, and apparently some from other worlds. Those Saiyans, their DNA is part of him, along with the, what was it, Namekian? Yes, that demonic Piccolo is part of him too. Even got some Kami in him, if you look hard enough. With the exposition out of the way, Mirai smiles and says thank you. Then her hair flickers golden and her fist goes cleanly through Cell's perfect torso. He still has his healing, thanks to that other monster's DNA, but after a bit of catharsis, Mirai has had enough, and really isn't enjoying herself anymore. Her younger father's gentle eyes stare at her in her mind, and her present father, now sitting up, is also watching, having finally swallowed that senzu thing. She sighs, and in a massive blast, wipes the Friezaless Bugman out of existence. Mirai then breathes out, releasing her near fully mastered Super Saiyan, thanks to her grandfather's musings. Gohan slowly gets to his feet and walks up to her, still staring, slightly wide-eyed. If only Master Piccolo could No, he shoves that thought aside. Her strength is her own. It has nothing to do with that man. After a moment of staring at each other, they go in for a hug. On the way back to Capsule Corp, Gohan asks her about her trip. About himself and his dad and Mum. How had things gone? What of, him? The detailed description of his crushed special beam cannoning fingers oozing through her own isn't much, but it does bring a smile to his face. The news that that Saiyan guy, Vegeta, is still around is interesting, if nothing else. He's not sure what to make of Bulma's awkwardness around the guy, but that doesn't really concern him. It's nice to know that things are well and that she'd done what they'd planned. His mum and dad are alive, and Piccolo, while not dead, is no longer an issue. He just kind of nods and agrees with the whole Namek and Frieza thing. It's not like he'd ever met the guy. Not even Bulma and Chi-Chi had met the guy face to face. He does suppose that he should be happy for that Vegeta guy, though. Maybe he wasn't all bad after all. He was only made bad by his master. Something that this Gohan can certainly relate to. And not unlike Gohan, the so-called prince had not wasted the opportunity to right the wrongs that plagued him by ridding the world of that master. The news about the whole Super Saiyan thing is also interesting, but ultimately it doesn't really change things. He's just happy to have his daughter back, even if she is quite a bit older than she was moments ago. When they get back to Capsule Corp and inform Bulma of their slightly altered activities, she's mostly fine with it. There's just one detail she's not so fine with. So Mirai went back and created a different timeline. Goku was alive there, and all seemed well, right? Okay. Then, instead of returning to her proper time and timeline, she instead went to yet another timeline, desyncing the ship's return settings in the process. At this point, Bulma can't help but babble on, lost in thought, as she says that all this means that there is still that original timeline, a time where Gohan died, Mirai fled, and, well, that cell thing likely killed everyone. That's 3 distinct timelines. Well, no, at least 3. Because this timeline that she created on arriving before she should have means that the her that left this 3rd timeline is now going back to a 4th timeline and might then go on to travel forward to an earlier point to rescue yet another Gohan, which will create a 5th timeline, and then a 6th, and a 7th, and so on. There could now be an infinite number of virtually identical timelines. After sitting there, listening to Bulma's somewhat morbid musings about how her actual dad is probably still dead, this current version of her dad, indistinguishable from any other, gives her hand a reassuring squeeze. Gohan then pipes up to say that that's not necessarily true. He was pretty out of it, drained of energy, to the point of unconsciousness, when Mirai had shown up and thrown him out of that cell thing's attack. His daughter, he squeezes her hand again, she could have only thought he was dead, because maybe this Mirai, or maybe another Mirai down the chain, had appeared in that, or this timeline, and saved him, just like she had. This Mirai can't help but smile. Her dad had always been smart, even if he'd acted dumb sometimes when Bulma had poked at him mentally. But there he was, making such great counterpoints. Bulma frowns at them both for a moment, then shrugs. Well, whatever. He might be right, and she's not going to waste her time worrying about some other timelines or multiple timelines versions of her. She's only really concerned about this her. Since time travel doesn't change anything for them, there's no point in worrying about it. Besides, the threats are gone for now, and this her is happy that she hadn't acted as funny around that Vegeta brute as this Mirai had mentioned. This poor innocent girl hadn't picked up on it, but Bulma knows herself well enough to know exactly what that other her was doing. She remembers trying that on Yamcha back in the day, before Piccolo. Here and now, she is happy enough to play surrogate grandmother, and they've got work to do now that they can move about without, impending death. And as they settle in for the long slog of rebuilding their still shattered world, we will bring Part 6 to a close. What do you think has happened with the timelines? Are there only 2, 3, 23 million, or an infinite number of them? What do you think will happen when Goasu opens that box of time rings? Should we queue up a Sonic the Hedgehog soundboard? Will the Supreme Kai of Time, Cronoa, need to show up to clean up this mess, or will Zamasu get to collab with any number of himselves? And ultimately, where do we go from here? Should the next part continue in this somewhat piecemeal future timeline? The evil Piccolo here is long gone, so the title card of this What If is, well, dead. Should we instead break with the tradition established by the single what if I've done that has actually gotten to this point, and continue the next part back in the past, what would have been the canon timeline? How about you decide? Either leave a comment or vote in the community tab poll that should show up when this video is posted. Then stick around and find out what happens next time on Dragon Ball: What If Piccolo Stayed Evil?